Hello, and welcome to En-Psych-Lopedia. Today we're going to be covering a very important topic, the psychology of misinformation. While many of the theories and concepts we cover on this channel are still being experimented on and refined, this topic in particular needs a special disclosure. General information processing has been a topic discussed for decades in psychology. However, research in the psychology of misinformation is currently a booming field. This can more or less be traced back to 2016 presidential election, as key phrases like fake news, disinformation, and alternative facts became the focal point of household discussions. All of this to say, while this video will catch you up on some of the highlights to this point, a tidal wave of new research projects is on the way, some of which may already have added to the current literature discussed in this video, maybe even prior to its release. If the field moves forward enough, maybe we'll consider doing an update. So let's get a lay of the land. What do you see out there? Right, that is a lot of fake news. And the literature on the topic seems to be growing nearly as fast as misinformation spreads. Some concepts that we could cover are tactics to convey misinformation, logical fallacies people often fall for, information processing in the different theories, different mental effects that increase persuasion, such as the illusory truth effect, the effect of fluency, personality traits, individual characteristics, political ideology, thinking styles, debiasing, or even pre-bunking. We bet that you're starting to get a feel for how much material there is to get through and why misinformation is such a challenging problem to tackle. Imagine having a 1,000-piece puzzle that you were trying to solve, but all the edges are warped and the shapes are changing while you're trying to put it all together. Trying to pin down and combat misinformation often feels just like that. However, fortunately for us, some brilliant researchers have ideas about why misinformation is believed and what we can do to reduce its spread. In the interest of time, we will be giving a brief overview of some psychological effects that we believe are pertinent to understand, some modern research that has shined a light on who is buying into misinformation, and last, some potential ways we could reduce the spread of misinformation. We plan on doing a video on debiasing and pre-bunking separately, as to do them justice requires more time than we have for this one video. However, if you want a more in-depth video on any concept we discuss here, mention it in the comments. Maybe we'll get to it soon. Let's start with fluency and the illusory truth. Imagine a lazy river, one where you could lay on your back and float smoothly for hours. Now imagine whitewater rapids, where you have to kick and fight just to keep your head above water. That is a metaphor for cognitive fluency. Although a little dramatic, fluency pertaining to incoming information refers to how easily a person can process the content of the message. If a message is perceived more easily, this impacts us psychologically. For example, research has shown that people tend to find a statement such as "ants don't sleep" as less believable if it's spoken by a foreigner as opposed to a non-foreigner. While the information is totally similar, just the accent alone is enough to influence how believable it is. Now we know what you may be thinking. Could prejudice account for this? The answer is yes and no. The researchers did attempt to control for this in one of their conditions. However, even if you don't find that satisfying, fluency effects can be seen elsewhere. The simple size of or type of font people see while reading a message impacts how confident they are in the information. In short, people like when information feels like the lazy river. It feels good, it doesn't take much work, and no floaties are required. However, people do not like when information feels like the rapids. It hurts our brains, takes way too much work to process, and if Advil is floaties, then we're gonna need some floaties. That leads us to the illusory truth. To start, let's define the illusory truth. We define this as repeated statements receive a higher truth rating than do new statements. This is exactly how it sounds. If you see it more, you believe it more. It sounds almost too simple to be true, but this finding has been replicated dozens, if not hundreds of times, dating back to the seminal study by Hasher, Goldstein, and Tapino in 1977. More recent work done by Fazio and company found that even when people know something is untrue, hearing it repeatedly increases how true it is perceived. This study is titled "Knowledge Does Not Protect Against the Illusory Truth Effect." If you are interested in this sort of thing, we highly recommend you check it out. So, why is it that hearing something repeatedly makes it more believable? That's right, we've come full circle. Fluency processing. Hearing the same old thing again and again makes it more fluent, and that information, even if it is bad information, feels like the lazy river. Unfortunately, this is like pee in our lazy river. Politicians often take advantage of this effect whether or not they know it. Often when campaigns are getting their message out there, it's more about hammering it into everybody's head than introducing someone to it for the first time. Also, let's consider social media for a moment. Who are you friends with? Are they like-minded people? Do you often agree with their political opinions? Do you mute people who often disagree with you? The implications for fluency processing and the illusory truth effect are pretty obvious. People tend to surround themselves with like-minded people on social media, and it isn't hard to see how echo chambers can be constructed. If misinformation seeps into that echo chamber and it gets reshared enough, something that was once only seen as somewhat believable could become accepted as fact by many people. So we know about at least two powerful psychological mechanisms that make people in general more susceptible to misinformation. But who typically falls for fake news? This next section is going to focus on research coming from America's neighbor to the north. That's right, Canada is coming to save the day, or at least give us the diagnosis. A researcher named Gordon Pennycook and several colleagues have largely led the charge when it comes to examining misinformation on social media, with an emphasis on political misinformation. And just to be clear for all academics out there, several of the studies we are about to mention were not headed by Pennycook, but this line of work is so synonymous with him that we've come to think of these as the Pennycook series. We mean no offense to any first authors we neglect to mention by name here, although the articles will be listed in the description. In our general discourse, it is easy for conservatives to call liberals uneducated and crazy, and vice versa for liberals. In our two-party system, we are all guided by our own red or blue colored glasses. Generally speaking, liberals are more likely to believe pro-liberal misinformation, and conservatives are more likely to believe pro-conservative misinformation. We call that motivated reasoning. This is when someone is more likely to believe something just because it furthers their own ideological biases. Does this mean that we are doomed to just becoming more radicalized as liberals and conservatives argue over news stories that might not even be true? All the while, neither side can smell the falsehoods right under their noses. While Pennycook and friends' research suggests that there are more factors at work than just motivated reasoning, in fact, the title of one of their studies says it all, being lazy, not biased. Susceptibility to partisan fake news is better explained by lack of reasoning than by motivated reasoning. Okay, so it's lazy thinking and not biased thinking? Well, how did they figure that out? The researchers used an assessment known as the CRT. No, not critical race theory, but the cognitive reflection test. This psychological measure is used so frequently that you may have even seen some of the items before. While there is some discussion over exactly what the CRT measures, here is the working theory. There are two main thinking types: analytical and intuitive. In theory, people with an analytical mindset will think deeper about information before arriving at a conclusion. People who think intuitively go with more of a knee-jerk response, trusting their gut instinct. Here's a sample question from the CRT. If you buy a bat and a ball for $1.10, and the bat cost $1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Go ahead and pause the video and think about it for a second. If you're feeling brave, put your answer in the comments section. It's not like this is a trick question or anything. Did you pause? Did you think about it for a second? If you said the answer was 10 cents, congratulations. You're wrong. It was a good try though, and that's the answer that most people tend to give. The correct answer though is 5 cents. Intuitively, we hear that the total is $1.10, that the ball cost $1 more, and do simple subtraction. $1.10 minus $1. However, analytical thinkers find the trick. As mentioned in the question, the bat must cost $1 more than the ball. Emphasis on the more. If the ball costs 10 cents, then the bat can only cost 90 cents more than the ball, which obviously is not $1. The correct answer is that the ball is 5 cents. This checks all the requirements of the question. The bat is exactly $1 more than the ball, and the total amount is $1.10. The CRT has several questions like this, which are specifically designed to see if people go with their knee-jerk intuitive answer or take the time to more deeply consider the question. Pennycook and adventurers found that people who can accurately answer questions on the CRT are also better at telling fake news from factual news. And this happens independent of whether a person is conservative or liberal. They also found that people who, and pardon our French here, score higher on the bullshit receptivity are also likely to believe misinformation. Bullshit receptivity is the actual name of the psychological assessment. Participants are shown statements and asked to rate how profound they are. Here's an example of a profound bullshit statement. Wholeness quiets infinite phenomena. A deep or analytical thinker will read these words and quickly realize that, well, it's bullshit. There's no real meaning to the sentence. However, people who think less analytically or more intuitively tend to rate these statements as profound, impressed by the flowery words. So if it makes you feel better when you hear a family member regurgitating blatant misinformation, just know that it isn't that they are bad people or that the whole political party they belong to is crazy, it's just that they aren't thinking too deeply about what they hear. If they accept fake news and begin spreading it, well, they are personally connected to that misinformation, and it can be hard to persuade them that it is false. Or, as Mark Twain famously put it, it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they have been fooled. But that gets into debiasing, and that is for another video. The last thing we wanted to briefly discuss is some ideas that Pennycook and cadets suggest could reduce the spread of misinformation. It seems like, at least from our perspective, that much of the media pushes the need to fact-check stories on social media. While this is well-intentioned, this tactic amounts to little more than a losing game of whack-a-mole. Fact-checkers just do not have the resources or time to keep up with the sheer volume of misinformation that comes out. Sure, they could catch the blatantly false stories, but many stories will go unassessed. This creates an implied truth effect, as people who see stories that are not marked as false may assume that this means that they are true. Not only is this strategy difficult, bordering on implausible, but it could also be more harmful than helpful. So what can we do? Remember that analytical thinking versus intuitive thinking thing? Well, let's make people think more analytically and not as knee-jerk intuitive. To do this, we can simply ask people to rate how credible they believe a story is before they share it. Research has suggested that people who are asked to rate the credibility of a story before sharing it are less likely to spread misinformation. This is due to the fact that they are forced to take a second and consider the truthiness of the article. This pulls them away from the knee-jerk intuitive thinking and pushes them more towards the analytical style of thinking. Last, fact-checking is flawed due to a major lack in resources. However, crowdsourced fact-checking can be a game changer. Instead of having professionals with limited resources trying to keep up with fake news, have people themselves judge the credibility of a story and make that visible for others to see. Sure, not even this method is perfect, but these are small steps that could be taken today to curb the spread of misinformation. Do you want a follow-up video on debiasing and pre-bunking? Let us know in the comments and we'll move it up on our list of topics to make videos on. Also, let us know if there are any psychological topics you are dying to know more about and want us to do a deep dive on. If you learned something new, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And if you really liked what you saw and want to support our team make more videos like these, consider visiting our Patreon. We'll see you next time.